NTU.com. All right, Pete Sepp is the president of the National Taxpayers Union, again, NTU.org. I've spent a lot of time breaking down this boondoggle of a spending bill, $3.5 trillion utopian social infrastructure dream. And we've had lots of folks on the program like Congressman Andy Biggs, Congressman Ghost are trying to break it down as well. Bottom line, we really don't know what's in this thing. And as Congressman Biggs said, it's not even written. But joining us is someone who's tried to break this all apart and figure out what's in it. Probably a lot of sleepless nights here. Pete Sepp joins us. Pete, how you doing today?
Sleepless nights, and sometimes trying to stay awake as you read through thousands of pages of legislation.
Yeah, you know, Pete, what some folks are telling me, like Congressman Andy Biggs, he was saying that you can't even really read it because it references other laws. First of all, parts of it aren't even written yet. You got to pass it before you can write it, as he was saying. But it references and changes other laws, so it winds up being not just thousands of pages, potentially tens of thousands of pages you have to go through.
Oh, easily. And of course, then you have all the IRS rulemakings that might be associated with the tax changes. And speaking of the IRS, I have to say the greatest brevity in this multi-hundred-page framework bill that we've seen, the reconciliation package, is the $80 billion increase in the budget of the Internal Revenue Service over 10 years. That's a huge funding increase, 50% for the tax agency. It takes up all of a paragraph right now, simply saying, use this for greater enforcement. And that is very troubling language, even though it's very sparse language, because hidden in there could be all kinds of massive new powers granted to the IRS that will show up in all sorts of depredations, really, of taxpayer rights down the line. We've been an organization concerned about IRS reform and taxpayer rights for over 3 decades. I've been there for 33 years, and I can personally attest taxpayers are frightened, truly frightened, about giving more power to the tax agency to intrude into their daily financial lives.
What they're trying to sell, it seems, and let me get your take on this, Pete, and we're talking with Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. They're trying to say they're catching the billionaires and the millionaires, the billionaire and millionaire tax cheats. And I noticed that something that's in there says that it's banking regulations. Anything that's a $600 or more transaction in your life, which is just about everything nowadays. It's going to be the cost of a hamburger, it seems, lately. That triggers reporting from the banks. How are they catching the billionaire tax cheats? $600 at a time? I mean, that doesn't sound credible to me. No, it isn't credible. And of course, you can also do this interesting exercise in revenue raising math. I mean, after all, the purpose of this is not really to somehow increase the fairness or increase justice in the tax system, whatever that means, getting the rich. It's really just to raise revenue. And once you realize that and take a look at some of the alternative proposals to this, you realize that it's just the middle class being tagged. Okay, just follow me on the simple math here. There are some who suggest, well, instead of monitoring the bank accounts of everybody with $600 of annual outflow and inflow in an account, let's raise the threshold to $10,000. Well, the projected revenue from this exercise, giving the IRS more power over bank accounts, plummets from about $450 billion to about $200 billion if you raise that threshold. It sounds confusing, but basically that's a tacit admission from the IRS and the Treasury, the government's own scorekeepers, and saying that, the higher we raise that threshold and the fewer people we look at, the less we're going to raise from this proposal. And that's why all Americans should be saying, no, we figured out who's being targeted by this proposal here, and it's us. And this announcement from the Treasury, as well as
House Speaker Pelosi that somehow only guilty people have anything to fear from this proposal is truly insulting. I mean, year after year, we have compiled evidence from taxpayers who are entirely innocent or made an honest mistake on their tax return. They're ending up paying hundreds, thousands of dollars in taxes and penalties simply because they don't have the resources to take the IRS to court and prove their point. Yep. They simply pay up.
We all know. I mean, we've known people, I'm sure you have as well, that have gone through hell for a simple mistake in filing. Let me ask you this. Okay, $80 billion on the enforcement side to maybe get 400 billion or maybe get 200 billion. I'm sure you're like me. You've seen projections that have just been wrong time after time when these folks come up with this stuff, these politicians. But have you figured out why they even care? I mean, we live in a world that just pumped in 18 months, $11 trillion into the economy. Why do they even need us?
Well, yes, you have to think about that sometimes. I mean, why go through the exercise and the potential political cost of raising taxes by 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 5 trillion when you could just borrow it all? Well, there is some kind of worldwide financial discipline mechanism that kicks into place for countries that overborrow. Yeah. When they lose investor confidence, there is a tipping point. And unfortunately, with the United States, it's very difficult to determine where that tipping point is. You can tell that many countries in the borrowing range of 100 to 200% of their annual economic output begin to suffer severe consequences. But what about the biggest and most important economy in the world right now, the United States? Do we have more leeway or maybe less leeway because we're expected to behave a little better than a country that just borrows hand over fist? We don't know, and that's the point. We cannot test it. Once we reach that tipping point and go over that cliff, there's no coming back, which is why we must be more careful in how much money we spend. Borrowing is nothing but taxation that's deferred and shuffled off to someone else's tax bill. We've got to be more careful with how much money we're budgeting right now.
To play this on the other side here, if you're another country, you're looking at the U.S., Pete. The U.S. is the reserve currency of the world. So to go off what you were just saying about responsibility and having some more discipline, once you reach that point where the rest of the world says, wait a second, this country's out of control, they're borrowing and spending like crazy, I don't want to transact in dollars anymore. And I think that the reserve currency status has given this nation probably more leeway and more ability to live beyond its means than anyone else.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. And that's really living on borrowed time. And that's a pretty horrible play on words when you consider that we've borrowed upwards of $28 trillion and will probably exceed $30 trillion once this year is over with. And that is a level, billions, trillions, those kinds of numbers just go past people after a while. What's really important is how much capacity do we have? How much are we borrowing relative to our annual economic output? That's what a household considers. How much are we borrowing relative to the money that we're bringing in and we hope to bring in years ahead? Well, it's not looking good. It's over 100% of our gross domestic product now, and could be much, much worse down the line. We have to remember the fundamental demographic problems of Social Security and Medicare may have been shunted aside because of the pandemic and greater worries about what government has to prioritize. But the problems haven't gone away. We're still living longer. We're still having trouble getting more workers into the system to support those who are leaving the system and going into retirement. Those problems, unfortunately, are going to cause the demise of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds probably sooner because of the pandemic rather than later. And we're talking about less than a decade to deal with them.
And Pete, you said something. I was looking at some of your posts on ntu.org, your website, and tagging off what you're saying here about the social side of things and Social Security. You see this $5 trillion spending binge or whatever it actually is. I've had some people tell me it's $5 trillion. And you're talking about the socialist state that they're trying to create and that we're never going to come back from. What are the things in this bill that aren't even connected to the monetary side, that don't even have a number on it, that they're like changing law or adding regulations? What are you unearthing, I guess, as you look through this thing?
Well, there are all kinds of hidden provisions. One, for example, has to do with the way that IRA investments can be made. There are many individuals out there who choose to invest outside of stocks and bonds. They want to have what are called directed IRAs, where they put their retirement assets into local real estate projects, where they have more control and more oversight of how those projects are going, and they can monitor directly what the investment potential is. There are regulations in that bill that are going to basically shut people out of being able to do those kinds of directed IRAs forever, regardless of income. There is a methane fee in the bill, for example, to give another one that has to do with assessing natural gas producers for the environment of their product. Well, we all know if you hit producers with a fee, an impact fee, they're going to have to pass along those costs to their customers, to their workers in the form of, if they happen to be publicly owned companies, they're going to pass along the costs to their investors. And that means people saving for college or retirement who happen to hold mutual funds or stocks in those companies. They're going to see diminished returns. And so that kind of thinking where, well, we won't call it a tax, we'll call it an impact fee, or we won't call it a restriction on taxpayers, we'll just call it an investment regulation. Ultimately, the financial impact is not borne by billionaires or borne by all of us who are investing for our future, who are trying to heat our homes. All of these things are going to make prices higher and the ability to get ahead financially much more difficult.
Yeah, and you and I both know the billionaires, they have ways of escaping all this stuff, and there just ain't enough of them. So they are always coming after the middle class and the hardworking folks out there. Let me ask you this, Pete. We've seen Senator Manchin and then right here in Arizona, Senator Sinema have been really the two blocks for this thing right now that are kind of stopping this. But I truly think that there is a number, it's probably 2.5 or 2.8 or who the heck knows what it is, that they'll negotiate down to. And then you'll still have all this other stuff crammed into the bill, all what I call the non-monetary things that have monetary impacts out there. What do you see in crystal ball? What do you see coming? How do you see this playing out right now?
I see several possibilities. One of this scenario would be that they decide on $2 trillion. Okay, well, this was originally a $3.5 trillion package. $2 trillion of it was going to be paid for with tax hikes, about $1.5 trillion from borrowing. That doesn't really solve our problem as taxpayers if they go with $2 trillion and just say, we won't borrow anything. The taxes will still be there. Those will still beat up on the economy. Another way they might try to play it is to, instead of this being a $3.5 trillion bill over 10 years, they'll make it $2 trillion over 5 years to appear that the cost is actually lower when it really isn't. They're simply betting on the fact that once they put these programs into place and the free goodies start coming out, and people don't realize it's not free, that they'll go for it anyway. And they'll say, hey, this is great. We're glad to get free daycare. We're glad to get universal pre-K, all of this stuff. And 5 years from when the bill is enacted, it will be so popular that they'll extend it another 5 and another 10 and another 20 until perpetuity. Well, that could be a way to shrink the size of the package without actually giving up any of the proposals. Here's hoping that Sinema and Senator Manchin and Democrats in the House who might be persuadable, like Tom O'Halloran in Arizona, will say, wait a minute, we're not going for these gimmicks. We're going to have to pay our own way here in a sensible manner without hurting the economy. And that means actually reducing the size of this spending package to an affordable level long term.
Yeah. Hey, it's hard to keep up with, Pete. They're constant. They're relentless. I'm proposing 0 trillion, but I don't think I have. Yeah. Okay. Finally, Pete, what do people do? I mean, I've been telling people to contact Senator Sinema and Manchin. I mean, what else can we do? I mean, people don't see these representatives, these senators. How do you try to convince them that, hey, we the people don't want this?
Well, Senator Sinema, of course, definitely needs support from folks who believe the opposite of the ones who are confronting her now, saying, give up, give us the 5 trillion, give us the 6 trillion. She needs to be told, no, we support your skepticism, Senator, keep it up. But also, I think folks need to realize and thought to how things like methane fees and IRA restrictions and vaping taxes and pass-through taxes from small businesses will affect them, and communicate that personal story directly to their lawmakers. They've also got to say to their lawmakers, this business of increasing the IRS's budget is the biggest threat to the middle class's prosperity I have seen in years, because perfectly innocent people will get hurt. They won't be able to plan for it like a tax increase that's enacted into law. Suddenly, someday, the IRS will just swoop down on them individually and gobble up their money because they can't afford to fight back. That's an important angle that needs to be communicated to lawmakers now. And folks like Tom O'Halloran need to hear from their constituents saying, look, whether I hear you or not, I think you have the common sense here to realize this is taking the country in the wrong direction. Let's work on something that's more moderate, that's more sensible.
And we certainly would love to hear from Congressman O'Halloran. Pete,
yes.
Hey, I appreciate it. I'm glad you're on it. As you unearth more, let us know, because I think this will also be it's a moving target, and it's going to modify as they continue to push this thing through. Pete, appreciate the time.
My pleasure.